This is Mazin Qumsiyeh speaking to you from Bethlehem, Palestine. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you. I dedicate this talk to this young man, 11-year-old Ayub Asaili, who was killed by a drone in Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. He was chasing after a dog that had run away from a relative's friend. This is a common occurrence here. This happened just on 11 March, just 2 weeks ago from the time you were receiving this call. This young man and many Palestinians like him suffer, and their families suffer because of US technology, because of US weapons that are sent regularly to fund the Israeli occupation and colonization of Palestine. The refugee camp where Ayub was killed is in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is one of the Bantustans or ghettos that the Israeli army have left for us. I live in the Bethlehem ghetto, or the Bethlehem People Warehouse, if you want. This Bethlehem People Warehouse, where Jesus was born, is home to 180,000 people struggling to make a living, to survive in an area that's now shrunk significantly from what it was in 1967 when Israel occupied this area. Furthermore, these 180,000 people include about 45,000 refugees from 1948, just like the Jabalia refugee camp, the place where Ayub lives, who is a refugee. This makes, of course, the situation even more complicated and more difficult for us. The killing and what happens is a symptom of the disease, the underlying disease. The underlying disease here is obviously a colonization system, an apartheid system, a racist segregationist system. And we Palestinians have resisted this system going back over 130 years, as I've explained in my book about popular resistance in Palestine. And we urge everybody to get involved in it, because just like with apartheid in South Africa, such a system of segregation requires an international consensus and an international solidarity to act on. We urge people to get involved with boycott, divestments, and sanctions. We are very optimistic that this is happening and is increasing with the release, for example, of the Kairos document by Palestinian Christians who have called on the international community to join us for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and by the participation of thousands and thousands of internationals who come visit us regularly here and work with us, and some of them even sacrifice their lives, as you know, like Rachel Corrie, who was killed 9 years ago, also in March this year, and whose killers still await justice, basically, and we do not have justice for the killers of Rachel Corrie. What does this mean for the future, and what is it that we are struggling for? I think our struggles are common human struggles. We have a lot to work, a lot to do. I just finished reading Howard Zinn's book for the third time, I think, because every time I read it, I find that I learn something new about the history of the United States. It's called The People's History of the United States. And in this book, you see basically that the struggles are common throughout humanity. The struggles are usually between the people and those who have greed, who have interests in certain things. These people who have greed are what came to be known now, of course, in the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy New Haven and Occupy Hartford, other movements, as basically the 1%. The 1%, they're actually much less than 1% of the population, but these are the people who control much of the wealth of the people. This is the same whether we are talking about the United States, or we are talking about London or England, or we are talking about Europe in general, or we are certainly talking about Palestine situation. In Palestine here, the struggle is not between Israelis and Palestinians, or between Jews and Arabs, which is even worse, since there are many, many Jewish Arabs whose religion is Jewish, obviously. This is not the case. It is no more the case in this situation than it was in South Africa. The struggle was not between whites and blacks. Neither was it between whites and blacks in the civil rights movement in the US. It's a struggle between, again, those 99%, the people who are struggling to survive as best as they could, and those greedy few people, really few people, who are trying to shape and transform the society to fit their own very, very, very narrow agendas. And this, of course, agenda includes militarism and includes, of course, corporate interests and all these things. In Israel, for example, the Israeli society is made up of a lot of poor people and very, very wealthy individuals who run the system, basically, who make millions of dollars. Ehud Barak just sold shares in some company for a few $1 million. So these people are actually people who own a lot of resources, and they control a lot of resources, not because they deserve these resources. It is because they are able, through the machinations of power and structure, to control these resources. This is basically what has always been our struggle, our collective struggle. Now, as Palestinians, of course, why should you care about, why should Americans care about Palestinians? I'm both a Palestinian by birth and by residency here now, and also a US citizen. I pay taxes still. I found you cannot escape paying taxes by going and living abroad. So I continue to pay taxes, and my taxes are being used to fund this system of repression. You see, governments and corporations cannot do their business without us. Without us, the people empowering them, they are unable to achieve the things they want to achieve. So I am urging you to think about these connections, because certainly the US is involved here. As Howard Zinn also said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. The US citizens are responsible for what happens here, and they are responsible for their own welfare. You cannot have a good economy in the US when the government, our government, the US government, had spent actually already $3 trillion on the war in Iraq. And they are planning to spend many more trillions on this conflict for Iran. Now, who is pushing for these conflicts? Again, it's the same group of elite people, Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, whatever you want to call them, in the US, people who are connected to corporations and militarism also, who have the same shared interest of pushing for this conflict with Iran that's coming up. I hope not, of course. But if it does, it will destroy what's left of the US economy. Because you can imagine, in a country that has $11 trillion in debt, having spent $3 trillion on a war in Iraq, a war not for weapons of mass destruction or terrorism, as was indicated, but because the same elite interests have pushed for this war. And now these same elite interests are pushing for a conflict with Iran to serve Israeli Zionist interests, among other interests. These are the kinds of things that they're pushing for. And if they do it, our economy, the US economy, will go down in shambles. So I urge you to think about all these variables as you continue in your conference and your activities, and in pushing against this oppression and repression that's coming from different people. I urge you to stay involved, because after all, this is our common humanity. My friend Vittorio Arrigoni used to end his messages by saying, stay human, because after all, to stay human means that we shed tribalism, We shed nationalism. We shed all those isms that make us separate, that makes us, that these elites try to push on us to divide us and keep us separate as Muslims, as Christians, as Jews, as other people. They try to utilize these divisions to continue to push us. So I again implore you to continue to be involved, to intensify your involvement, and you are certainly welcome to come visit us in Palestine. Palestine welcomes you. We have beautiful now spring, and we have the Welcome to Palestine campaign is coming up, April 15, if you are interested, for a week of activities in Palestine. Come join us. أهلا وسهلا في فلسطين. Welcome in Palestine.